Welcome in and thank you for joining us for our May edition of CMMC Connect. We're glad that you could all be here. My name is Monica Pastor. I'm the Senior Events Marketing Manager here at Redspin, and I'll be guiding today's conversation. If you're working towards CMMC compliance right now, you already know the requirements are moving, the deadlines are real, and the pressure is on. That's exactly why we're here. Welcome to CMMC Connect, our monthly space for cutting through the noise and getting to what actually matters. We see some familiar faces from past sessions, so welcome back to those and welcome in for the first time if you're new. And for those of you that are just joining us for the first time, let's briefly cover some housekeeping items and how CMMC Connect will flow. So first, CMMC Connect is an interactive session. Please feel free to turn on your camera while you're listening in. Take yourself off mute when you have a question so we can talk together. Next, here's how today will go. I will start with a quick review of updates from the field. Then we'll run through questions to this month's pre-submitted questions. And after that, we'll open up the floor for the live Q&A. To help us stay organized and make sure that we can answer as many questions as we can, please post your questions in the Q&A box, not the chat. We'd like to reserve the chat for fun conversation, feedback, and just make sure to put those questions in the Q&A. During the live Q&A segment, please raise your hand and come off mute to ask a question. Please just keep it to one question per person so we can make sure to keep that time fair. And remember, we're always here to talk afterwards. If you want to have a deeper dive, we're happy to set up a call afterwards as well. Next, check out the resources tab near the chat and the Q&A in your Zoom interface to see helpful links that we might reference today. And as a reminder, this session is being recorded as a live podcast, and we'll publish that and share it as soon as it's ready. And finally, don't forget to take the feedback survey at the end of the session. It only takes a minute, and it really helps us make these better. Plus, if your question didn't get answered today, you can drop it in the survey and we'll follow up with you after with an answer. All right, we are in good hands today. Let me introduce the Redspin team. Joining us, Dr. Graham, would you like to kick us off with introductions and then we'll go around from there?
No, not really. You asked if I wanted to, but I mean, Dr.
Okay.
Thomas Graham, VP CISO for Redspin, been around the block 2 or 3 times versus just once or twice. My full-time job is trying to make Rob T go crazy, but been around since the earliest days of CMMC and a contractor prior to that. So bear with me. Damien?
Hi, I'm Damien Galladay, and I'm one of the CCAs here at Redspin.
Hey, everybody. Rob Teague, VP of Redspin, oversee the consulting teams, but mostly function as the affirming official. So it's my lovely signature block on your certificates. Over to Felice.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Felice Blake. I'm a consultant on the CMMC readiness side with Redspin and looking forward to the discussion and conversation today. Thank you.
Well, thanks for the introductions, team. And now let's get into some ecosystem and updates from the field. So, Mr. Thomas, over to you.
All right. So a reminder for your 2026 bingo cards, FIPS 140-2, TAC 2, whatever you say, is moving to historical status prior to the end of the fiscal year. So what does that mean? Well, it means honestly, a couple of things. One, if whatever technology you're using for that type of encryption, if they're now going to pursue the FIPS 140-3 standard, then so long as they're either in that process or they already have that cert, it's no harm, no foul. If they're in the process and you have everything set once the certification, the validation certificate goes historical for your CMMC assessment, it would basically count as a temporary deficiency. And there's some requirements around that that are identified in the rule, but it wouldn't count against you on the assessment. The other side of that is the technology is not going to pursue FIPS 140-3. And at that point in time, then it becomes a decision for you and your organization on what you're going to do from that point. Because once it goes historical, then the certificate, it can't be used during a CMMC assessment. But that's the short version, Monica.
Thank you.
Yeah, I guess I'll pick up from here, Monica. And with the assistance of Lauren, because Lauren actually sat in on the town hall on Tuesday evening. So Lauren is our director of marketing, and our fun part of CMMC for all the Redspin clients. She helps you draft up your announcements once you become CMMC certified. So during the town hall on Tuesday from the Cyber AB, they mentioned only 5 new CCPs that came in, since the last town hall. Now that they attributed that to, some of those new CCPs that came in had already met the requirements for CCA, so they may have knocked out their CCP and then turned right around and went into the CCA role. And that's why you see 130 new CCAs. So they're thinking that that's what happened with the low number of CCPs. But the bottom line, everybody, is training is continuing. ISACA is the new Keiko, so they are overseeing all the training. And we here on the Redspin team have quite a few of our folks that are assisting ISACA with the development of the CCP exams, etc. So next question was, a mock assessment cannot turn into a formal assessment. So we get this question a lot here at Redspin. The main thing is if we start an assessment and it looks very much like it looks like you're going to fail, we can absolutely flip that into a mock assessment. Now, there's some administrative things we got to do to make that happen, et cetera, but that avoids you failing the assessment. Then we'll run you through a mock so that you can capture all those gaps, give you time to clean those up, and then you can come back in and do the assessment. However, if we start a mock assessment and we finish that mock and you finished with a 110, we cannot flip that over so that it is an actual CMMC level 2 assessment. You can only go one way, not the other. All right. Next for you is the MSP and a CSP. So there's still a lot of confusion out here on what a CSP is, and the ESPs are kind of clouding that up as well. The main thing is if you have an external service provider, we know them as a managed service provider or managed service security provider. If they stand up a cloud and then they bring you into that cloud, they are the owner of that cloud. That means they are not just an ESP. They are also a cloud service provider because you're using their cloud to store your CUI data. Flip that back on the other side. If they stand up a cloud for you, like our SOC team does, they establish government clouds for our clients. And then once those are up and running, that gets turned over to the clients, and it is the client's cloud. So if at any given point they say, hey, Redspin, it was great working with you, we're going to go find somebody else, that cloud goes with them. That's how you know your ESP is a true ESP, because they're just managing your cloud. All right. So hopefully that breaks up some of that confusion. I did see Colin McQueen dropped in a question about CCPs and all that. I think we'll have time here at the end of this, Colin, to address that one live. So I just kind of want to let that sit there. I see Brian Graham kind of responded to you, but we'll bring this up live for you.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you, sir.
Mm-hmm. Outside of that, I think that's it, Monica.
You want to talk about the number of level 2 certs from last month to this month, Rob?
There she be.
So we added 124 level 2 certs since last month. The full count is 1,391.
Yep.
Record high.
Yeah, nowhere near where we should be for the amount of contractors the Department of War has stated is out there that require this. So we're nowhere near that. And, there's a lot of concern about the November 10th, 2026 date. That is not a drop dead date. Many primes are pushing that as such because they're trying to arm their subs to be certified so that when those contracts do get updated, they can go right in and bid on them without waiting. And that allows them not to miss any contracts. But the real deadline for you guys is 10 November 2027. That's when all the level 2 contracts will be completed and being updated. And then they're going to, in phase 4, circle back to all the existing contracts that are currently open and active right now. And they'll get all those updated. But when you go into EMAS right now, there's over 2,800-ish companies sitting in EMAS. So there's a lot sitting there. They're either waiting for their assessment to start. They started their assessment and they're in phase 4, or they're right in the middle of their assessment and just waiting for it to complete to be loaded. But that's a pretty good number considering where we started back in January of 25. And I love this chart because you can kind of see the progression of how many assessments are being completed.
Awesome. Well, thanks
Hey,
for all.
there's a follow-up question from Chuck on your MSP CSP points, Rob, in the
Mhm.
chat. Chuck asks, so if they're reselling the M365 Azure service and it can be moved with them, you're safe?
Yeah, the biggest kicker there, and Thomas, you can jump in and help me. It's really who owns the cloud, right? So in the case of the Redspin SOC team, when they stand up a cloud, they are provisioning the licenses for you, but the licenses are in your name. They're not in Redspin's name. That is also one of the key indicators. So they get your licenses scheduled and brought in from Microsoft, and then from there they go in and establish the cloud, get it up and running, get your initial users in there. They run the test functions with those users and the admins in your cloud. And once that's done, it gets handed off to you, and now you're off and running. If that's not what's happening with your ESP right now, they could be a cloud service provider. And Thomas, if I missed anything up there.
No, I mean the biggest component in there is it isn't cloud service provider, but the in either MSP or MSSP. It means managed. If they're just standing it up for you and you're just getting your licensing through them and you're doing all the management, they're just a vendor that you're paying money to at that point, just like they're any other vendor. But if they're managing that tenant in any way, shape, or form, now that's when they're getting brought into those conversations because they're either helping provision users ongoing, they're helping provide security protection services. That first word, just ask yourself, are they actually managing it, number one? But then who actually owns that tenant? If they retain ownership, yep, to Rob's point, they're a CSP. If it's you having ownership, meaning you can move it whenever you please based on the contract, then more than likely they're not a CSP, but they could be one of those managed components.
All righty.
Right. Thank you both for those updates and answering those questions that came in. All right, it's time for our pre-submitted Q&A. Let's kick it off with our first question. Rob, this one's for you. Can you please help me understand the types of CUI and what can be operable in commercial space given they are for a COTS item? We are receiving the CUI SP privacy. Can you help me determine what system hygiene standard qualifies for it? NARA confuses me, even the subject criteria to be operable in commercial space with no bar on citizenship status. The lines blurred to even explain to executives with clarity around it. How can you help?
Okay, so yeah, there's a lot going on in this question. So let's break it down. Let's first start with the bottom of this and the citizenship status. So for access to CUI, the only requirement is a need to know. So if you deem and we're talking basic CUI. If you deem that individual needs access to that environment because they're working on a project or whatever the case may be, and this is basic CUI, meaning it does not have the no foreign national view tagged to it, like ITAR data, which is, weapons and ammunition and stuff like that, then that's all the justification you need is a need to know. If it is ITAR data, now you're talking no foreign nationals can view that type of data. Now you have to restrict them from that. Okay. So setting aside the citizenship. The next piece that we're talking about here is this SP privacy that's come out. This is really dealing with PII, which our team kind of put there in parentheses for you to help kind of clean that up. Because SP privacy is something we're just now starting to see. It's really referring to PII. And is PII considered CUI? Depends on how it's levied versus within the contract. So most people take the safer stance and view it as such when it's tied to the contract. Moving up to the next one with COTS. COTS has no bearing on CUI. The CUI cannot be in commercial, period. Whether you're using a COTS system or you had a laptop that was built specifically for your projects is immaterial. The fact is CUI cannot live in a commercial environment. It's got to be in a well-protected cloud environment, or you need to lock your on-prem systems down. That's where the FIPS comes in, right? So commercial environments most oftentimes do not have the FIPS requirement, and that's what's really locking it to that. So, and Thomas, you're kind of like the big one on the NARA, and I agree. It confuses everybody. It's a very big, of information, right?
You have to start there though, and the reason why you have to start there is because all the federal agencies will tell you NARA's guidance takes precedent. That's why you have to start there. But the individual agencies, to include the Department of Defense, Department of War, they have their own CUI registry that has further clarity and guidance on how that specific department wants you to handle the CUI underneath their contracts. And they actually give you the references to the DoD instructions that outline kind of what that authority is. So there is some further things as you go a couple of steps down. But at the end of the day, yes, NARA can be confusing. I don't know anybody on this call, to include all you guys in the audience, that would ever say that the government is a shining example of clarity and logic, but they are the executive agent over all CUI. So at minimum, what they say, everyone has to follow.
Now, Ahmad, I see that you're dropping some more questions in the Q&A session. So the first one is very, very convoluted. I will tell you, for that one, it's probably best if you set something up with us so we can have some one-on-one time with you and actually explain all of that, kind of get clarity on what your questions are so that we can properly answer them, okay? Outside of that, if you go to GCC High, you have a great question here, which is one that we ourselves have bounced around, is can a non-foreign national or a non-US citizen be an admin in a GCC High environment? So we've actually bounced this around because we use a team in India, not so much here on our Redspin consulting teams, but mostly on our SOC teams and our parent company, Clearwater Security. Yes, those folks can absolutely come in. Again, basic CUI, it's a need to know. However, we do take that stance of making sure we are safe when we do that. So first of all, if the organization is utilizing any type of ITAR data or nuclear data, that is the non-foreign national type data, those folks cannot be an admin in that cloud. They've got to be removed because they can't view anything. Even if you've got the credentials of the admin blocked where they can't get to the files, it's still best practice to keep them out of that completely. For those that are doing basic CUI, all day long, Ahmad, all day long, they can be in there working on this stuff. Again, that's why during the CMMC assessments, we really talk about separation of duties, making sure those admins can get in and manage the environment, but they necessarily don't have access to the data. So those are all the kinds of things you need to be thinking about if you're going to do that route. We do have some of the folks from India that actually establish our clouds, but once it gets to a certain point, before the client's data even goes in, we remove those folks from the construction of that cloud, and that all gets handed over to the US team. And that's where now we start the data migration, adding the users in there, all those different things. So hopefully that helped. But Ahmad, please reach out to us, whether it be LinkedIn and email, however you need to get a hold of us, and we can set up a call where Dr. Thomas Graham and I can sit with you and kind of walk you through that. Okay.
So our next question is, what software tools might make CMMC easier for small businesses and manufacturers, especially those with limited IT resources? Coming to you again, Rob.
Yeah, back at me. But Thomas can jump in here. So can Felice and Damien. Look, there's, when I served in the Army, one of the main things we looked at is if we brought anything on board, whether it be software, whether it be a solution, a server, whatever the case was, one was never a good number. It always had to have two because somebody at some time has to go on vacation. So you need a backup, right? So two is always the best number and the lowest number that you should think about. But when we're talking about this, the software is not going to do anything to help you with IT resources. You're talking actual bodies and seats. The only thing that can, in my opinion, help you in that particular instance is an external service provider. If you do not have the resources, find a trusted provider, have them manage your services, and they act as an extension of your team. I don't know that there's any software out there that can provide that type of service for you. Unless I'm wrong, guys. You can join in.
No, I mean, honestly, the answer to this question is the mandatory CCA response. It depends. The reason why it depends on your environment. It depends on what technologies are in play. It depends on, potentially even other regulatory requirements you have to fall under. At the end of the day, the software tools to make it easier for small businesses and manufacturers, there's not that one software tool that, trumps them all. I would say the closest is probably having some type of tooling or service to help you manage the governance. Some type of GRC tool, managed compliance tool that not only addresses CMMC, but also addresses the other things that you have to comply with, whether it be ISO, whether it be HIPAA, whether, it's other things in the manufacturing environment. That's probably the closest. But as far as everything else, honestly, it just depends on your environment. It depends on what you want to do. We talk a lot about cloud on here just because that's the direction a lot of organizations are going to, but cloud isn't, the answer for everybody. And that's why, Rob mentioned, having a conversation about that just because, maybe you don't need it with your implementation. First organization ever passed, Aeroglen, they weren't in the cloud. They were all on-prem.
Yep, absolutely. And, back in the early days of when the program kicked off, it was really the manufacturers and the aerospace organizations that really struggled with this because you can't put those CAD systems and CMMC machines and all that in the cloud because you're going to spend a lot of money in utilization fees. So they have a hybrid environment. They keep the CUI in the cloud, and then they have a way that they can move that over to the CNC machine so they can print whatever parts they need, and then they go from there. But that was a big challenge for them at the start of this program.
Hey, Rob, can I add one thing to that?
Yeah, sure, please.
One of the things that I've seen is, and I have had this happen with a couple of clients, is that they allot a budget, they purchase some different programs, and really they just were the victim of an outstanding sales pitch. But then their team is not equipped to actually build the environment that they need. And that's the one thing I wanted to add is just be cautious, because oftentimes when we have a significant need within a business that we're, and it's a tried and true reference to the easy button, but just be careful with purchasing something that your team may not be able to manage, and you want to find the right people. It's that perfect recipe of having the right equipment and the technical expertise, and then also understanding what you've got to do to be ready for the CMMC piece. Thank you.
Thanks, Felice. That was
Yes, sir.
a great point.
Thank you, please. All right, next question. How to reduce creep and identify the specifics of what is and isn't CUI. Damien, let's hear from you.
So, to identify the specifics of what is and isn't CUI, best place to start with that is going to be your customer. Reaching out with that contracting officer, that PMO, or that prime contractor who's subbing out to you, and asking them to reach out to that contracting officer and getting that clarification on what is or isn't CUI. Once you have that established, if you're looking at reducing creep and reducing your assessment scope, that really speaks to controlling the flow of CUI within your environment and understanding where your CUI is at and how it is moving through that environment and where it needs to go, and just limiting that scope.
All right. Anybody else have anything to add? All right. Thanks, Damien. Next question. Does it matter if we are black or white? For CM Level 2-3.4.8 Application Execution Policy, how should assessors evaluate cases where an organization's SSP and documented policy clearly state a whitelisting, permit by exception approach, but the implemented technical controls, example AV, endpoint management, or GPO configurations, reflect a blacklisting model? Let's hear from Mr. Thomas.
And see, Thomas, this is why you don't want to miss our pre-meetings, because you get these hard questions.
Y'all would throw it to me anyway, whether I don't have a choice in the matter, I don't think. But as far as being black or white, if you look in the objectives, there are those options. Most organizations have a combination of the two, honestly, even whether they realize it or not, just depending upon the technologies in play. However, the hallmark of this question, your documentation has to match what your technical implementation is. If it doesn't, then honestly, an assessor can't actually evaluate those show me pieces. If you don't identify that you're doing, blacklisting, for instance, the assessor doesn't know if you're implementing it how you said you were implementing it. So that's where you would need to start, whether it's white, black, hybrid. If you still use app locker, God bless you. But at the end of the day, The easiest way to screw up in an assessment or even screw up in your implementation is have the documentation not match your implementation. So the short answer to your question here, update your documentation before you go into an assessment.
Yeah, and if I can give you an example, I mean, when we stood our cloud up and Dr. Graham was the orchestrator of that wonderful process, but when we stood it up, we made the conscious decision to lock it down. And to this day, it's still locked down completely. No printing, no mobile phones, no removable media, nothing. You can't even download. But we are slowly starting to turn whitelisting on. So for example, Adobe will need that to do signatures on certificates as the affirming official. So that gets whitelisted. And even though our main stance is blacklisting, by approving Adobe for our use in our GCC High environment, it now started a whitelist for us. So now we're tracking both. So hopefully that kind of helps you.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Next question. We have customers that purchase the CUI and non-CUI items. The bill to and ship to addresses may or may not be the same. We also have 2 environments, 2 ERPs. One is commercial, non-CMMC, and the other is for CMMC customers. When the customer is buying the CUI item, their tax information are considered CUI and transaction is performed in CMMC environments. What about if they buy non-CUI items? Do they have to protect their information in commercial environment? Or since a customer came for the CUI item, that customer should be grouped as CMMC and even non-CUI related history. How should it have been protected? Felice, what are your thoughts here?
For the length of the question, we have a simple response. You know that there is a customer and a client that's involved with the CUI environment. So treat everything that they're doing as CUI. It's not going to hurt their CUI purchases or anything that they're doing on that side. And so you go ahead and you just reduce the risk and you make it as simple and easy for your team as possible and for the client. And it's no more worries or concerns that you may have missed something by not placing them in that CUI environment.
No, excellent point. So to give you an example, Rob, who is, Thomas will tell you every day, 24 hours a day, 365 days a week, that I'm the biggest risk for Redspin. So, because, I have a lot going on. So if Rob is dealing with this particular client on the commercial side and pushing, parts and information to him, and then I'm also working with them on the CUI side, I could easily get those crossed. And that's what Felice is saying. Avoid that and reduce that risk by just leaving it all to the CUI pieces there, right? It's just a best practice stance, but most importantly, you're doing your due diligence to reduce that risk.
Awesome. Thank you, Felice and Rob. All right, I think this is our last pre-submitted question before we go into our live Q&A. So how strict should the separation between administrative and non-administrative accounts be? For example, should administrative accounts be restricted from performing non-security functions such as opening files or conducting web searches? Rob, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. So first of all, okay. So this one, it's a little, let me start at the beginning. First, when we get into the CMMC assessment, we're looking for clear separation between your users and your elevated users. Those with elevated privileges should not, in that role, be accessing any type of files that have data in it. Absolutely not. And we're going to look for that during the assessment. Why? I think Felice at the end of this will tell you some stories that she's been following in the news recently of admins that had access to that type of data and totally destroyed the companies because of the insider threat piece there. What we do is when we come in, we're going to ask you to demonstrate this. We're not just going to read your documents and look at your evidence. You're going to demonstrate this. So we want to see a regular user try to perform an administrative function and be blocked. Then we're going to, on the same next, test, we're going to ask an admin to go in and perform a user function, and it should be blocked. That is a clear separation due to the insider threat, right? Because the elevated privileges is pretty much the keys to the kingdom, especially if they have a break glass account. It gives them access to everything. So you really need to control that. What is the purpose of the admin having access to the data? They really don't need it. If they need that access, they need to use a regular user account to get into the data, right? other piece for you is web searches. I will tell you as a technician, doing this for years in the Army and then following with my years here with Redspin, as a technician, sometimes when you're in those administrative privileged roles, you have to go out to vendor websites, especially if you're troubleshooting those devices. So again, this ties into the question of the blacklisting and whitelisting, right? So you pick those particular web sources that the admins need access to, and you whitelist those and turn them on so that while they're in their privileged account, they can still go to those vendor websites for the troubleshooting purposes. You definitely don't want an admin going out to some kind of cloud share such as Box or pick a cloud environment that's out there. You don't want an admin having access to everything, to include a cloud like that, because they can simply copy everything and put it up in there. That's why during awareness and training, we talk about insider threat. Have you trained all your folks to recognize the indicators? That all of it kind of ties together, but you need a clear separation between your users and your admins. And I'll pass this to Felice so she can tell you some of the latest happenings that I'm sure some of you have also
Right.
heard about in the news.
Yeah, no, the one that is probably the most striking and heartbreaking at the same time. He was a young military. I mean, I think he was 19 or 20 when he started this, and he got 15 years of prison. Texera, we're happy to share the link to the story so that you can see it. In order to impress some of his gaming friends on Discord, he top secret information that some of it was at the very top of clearances because he had too much access. And that this was the perfect example of what Rob is describing, is that it's, you want to have that admin perform their duties. Under no circumstances did he need to have access to the data of what general officers were looking at within the military. And I know that there was one we talked about, Rob, on the private sector side, and you said it was 2 people, right?
Yeah, and that was tied to the termination process of that organization. So these 2 individuals were brothers, and I can't think of the names, or the company, but it was a contracting company, and they were both being terminated. However, during the process, only one was properly terminated, meaning their access to the system was cut, but the other one was not. And that second individual brother downloaded everything the company had and then deleted everything the company had. So that organization lost all their data. Now, they were able to recover it in certain backups, but again, that was a lot of work. How much time did it impact the business simply because they failed a step in the termination process? So those little things, what we call anthills, can quickly build into a mountain for you if you don't follow the processes you put in place.
Damon,
I'd
did you
get
add
back to you.
to that?
I mean, absolutely agree with everything Rob said. And, the one additional thing I'll point out here is, say what you do and do what you say, document it. You have that listed out, that these are non-security functions. These are the security functions. This is what those admins can do. These are the websites that they can go out and access. They can go to, these vendors' websites, and everything else they can't, because when we go to assess, we are going to be looking at how you are defining those non-security functions, and we are going to be looking explicitly at those privileged accounts not being able to execute those.
Excellent point.
We are opening it up to live Q&A. We have till the top of the hour, so let's get to as many questions as we can. So drop in your question in the Q&A box or raise your hand and ask it live. Just remember to keep it to 1 question per person live. We did have some questions come in, though, that we'd like to address first. One of the questions was regarding clouds. So what is the purpose of a GCC High cloud via an MSP when I have an ASW Gov cloud?
There
Yeah,
may
and I
not,
can.
well, I
Yeah.
was just going to say it may not be anything, but it could be everything. Yeah.
Exactly.
So it depends. There's that answer again. But no, Rob, I saw where you answered in the chat, just kind of in a short order. But honestly, that's the direction of the answer, is that with all the clouds, whether it's GCC High, whether it's AWS, whether it's Google, whether, it's Oracle, whatever, the environment has to fit and meet your use cases. So where we see AWS a lot is in those organizations that are doing a lot of development work. They're doing the development work simply for, either a contract. They're doing it for, internal use on the CMMC services, it could be any numbers of things. Generally with that, development work plays better with AWS, just those S3 buckets. For GCC High, maybe they have that as well, but that could be for their operational side versus their development side. So is there an absolute need? No, but do some organizations have multiple clouds depending upon their architecture? Absolutely.
Yep. And that kind of rolls right into the question that Mitch asked, which was, why do we need Redspin to spin up a cloud? I was just giving you an example there. Sometimes we have organizations that come to us that they don't even know where to start in the CMMC journey. So they really sign up for what we call the Redspin Ready program, which is a cloud service, an MSP service, and then 200 hours of consulting where we bring in Felice and that consulting team in to help them prep their documents. Once that's complete, obviously we can't certify them or be their C3PAO. So that's where we reach out and they start shopping for a C3PAO to get their assessment. Sometimes organizations come to us with a cloud already in place. They just want a different MSP provider or that external service. So they'll bring their clouds to us. We'll take not so much ownership, but management of that cloud for them. So we have everything in place for services for organizations that don't know where to start, all the way to organizations that have started and got burned by another company, which we're seeing that a lot. SPs that don't know what they're doing, cloud service providers that are not FedRAMP authorized or FedRAMP equivalent, on and on and on the list goes. So we kind of got a service for everything just to help the DIB contractors with whatever they're struggling with. But no, we don't have to stand up a cloud for you. We even have a team that can manage your on-prem security protection assets as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Rob. Next question from James. Who should be the listed CMMC responsible official, a member of executive leadership or the IT leadership?
That is a great question. And that is entirely up to you as an organization. For us here at Redspin, I'm the affirming official for the signatures on the certificate. However, Thomas is our affirming official for SPRS. So it just kind of varies. You definitely do want an executive sponsor. Those are the two requirements we're going to ask you for when we're doing an assessment with you. The executive sponsor is really who's approving the assessment to take place. And then we're going to ask you for a point of contact. That's the person we're going to work with on a daily basis for logistics, questions, scheduling, those kinds of things. Most organizations are leveraging C-suite executive to be the executive sponsor, but we've assessed companies that are like 3 people. And they're all dual hatted. So sometimes we do see an executive sponsor that's also the point of contact. So it varies. It depends on you. A lot of companies, DIB companies that I speak with, if it's an affirming official for SPRS, they're typically using them as the affirming official or executive sponsor for the assessment. But I would say the more you can keep that to the C-suite, the better off you'll be.
Awesome.
And then anybody else want to join in there?
I mean, ultimately, whoever's going into Spurs and affirming that Spurs score is the person making that attestation to the government that your company is still compliant with the CMMC requirements.
Mhm.
And that is the person who is carrying that risk, right? So it should be somebody within the organization. 32 CFR states a senior level representative is the term they use, but it should be somebody in the organization that is, able to own that risk and able to drive the choices to, resolve issues around CMMC.
Great addition, Damian. Thank you.
Thank you. Next,
Yeah, real quick, Monica, I do want to jump to Colin. Do you have Colin on your list?
you can go to Colin's question.
Okay, so I promised Colin we would address this live. Actually, I didn't promise. I just said we would. But Colin, so your question is one that is now starting to resurface. And we noticed that back in the day, when the Cyber AB first stood up the CAICO, which is the organization that originally was doing all the certifications of the assessors and the training courses, they did have a requirement that in order to become a CCA, as a CCP, you have to attend 3 assessments before you can be a legitimate CCA. That has been removed. That is no longer the case. However, the problem we are seeing now is that because when the 32 CFR rule came out, and it designated the assessment teams to be a lead CCA, a CCA, and a QA. And the QA also has to be a CCA. It completely removed the CCPs from the picture of assessments, right? So where are the CCPs right now? They're all hanging out with Felice and the rest of our consulting team, and they are prepping organizations. I will tell you, Felice and I are on, the teams with ISACA helping redevelop, if you will, the CCP exams. Everything's being tied to Rev 3 for the future. But more importantly, what we opted to do with that entire team, not just me, not just Felice, not just ISACA, but whoever all is on that panel, we opted to say, listen, the CCPs, we need them back in the assessments, right? How else are they going to learn how to prep an organization if they're not sitting in those assessments and gaining that valuable knowledge and experience? So most of the way we're writing these exam nows is pushing the CCPs back into that. But right now, it's really challenging because of the way the 32 rule is written. I know that Dr. Thomas Graham, who is one of the members of the advisory council with the cyber AB. Eventually, that is something they're going to be addressing with the PMO's office sometime down the road. It could be wrapped up in the new rule when revision 3 of NIST 800-171 gets added to the program, and they may adjust that then. It could be a memorandum that they shoot out that says, hey, we're adjusting the assessment teams to include the CCPs and removing one of the CCAs. Who knows how they want to tackle this, but it is definitely taking the CCPs out of that picture.
I'll also point out, because I had, well, we'll say up till about 6 months ago, the same thinking. Some of the material on Cyber AB's website still reflects the old requirements for for CCPs having 3 assessments. So I will just point that out there for you as well, Colin, because I do know that's floating on a few places on the AB's website. That is not correct. The AB just hasn't updated their website yet.
Yeah, it is outdated, Colin. But there are still some RPOs and C3PAOs that are hiring CCPs. We are actively looking for CCPs right now. So if you're very interested in that, Colin, and you want to come be part of this crazy montage team, you're more than welcome to submit a resume. You can go out to our Clearwater Security website and you'll see the job positions available for the CCP.
Okay. Thank you.
We also have it listed in our resources, careers at Redspin. You can click on that really quick and it'll pull that page.
Beautiful.
Okay. Thank you. I'll check that out.
Yep.
Otto is asking, I would like to understand the best approach to determine whether a system can be classified as a special asset under CMMC Level 2. In my case, the system is a SCADA environment running on a Windows machine, but is fully segregated within an operational technology network. What criteria or guidance should be used to properly evaluate if this type of system qualifies as a special asset, considering its function, architecture, and network isolation? Any insights or recommended best practices would be greatly appreciated.
Hold on before you go, Thomas.
I was just going to ask Monica what that word was again. So I think you're talking about SCADA systems,
SCADA.
Monica.
Yeah, SCADA. I meant what you knew, Monica.
So, I mean, as far as a specialized asset, there's very specific categories they fall into. My first advice to you is going to be to take a look at the level 2 scoping guide and see if your system meets one of those categories. If it's true SCADA, more than likely it is. If it's not, then that's where it gets a little bit more murky. Looking a little bit more broader in the OT world, operational technology is one of those specialized assets, but the management console, that may be in play at minimum as a security protection asset, if not a CUI asset itself. And what I'm getting at there is maybe that's the system that receives like CAD drawings, and then you use that system to pull the designs out of email, out of whatever software you're using, and transfer it then over to the system that's actually going to build whatever those designs are from. At that point, that system would be in play, but the actual big pieces of equipment out on your machine floor, they wouldn't be. So look at those definitions first and see if what you have in play fits in one of those categories. And if it does, yeah, you can you can absolutely mark it as a specialized asset for level 2. Now, if you ever have to go for level 3, go have a couple of drinks and then call us and let's have a discussion, because at level 3, it's a whole other animal.
Yeah.
All right, moving on to the next question. We've got a lot of unanswered questions here. We'll try to get to them, guys. Question from Adam. For App Locker, would it be sufficient to say that everything is blocked besides what is in the program files, window files, etc., but is strictly controlled on who and what can be installed in those folders? Admin only, one admin in company who needs approval for each software download.
So
I know.
it's sufficient or adequate?
Right. Yeah. We see a lot of different companies take different stances with this, but we ourselves use AppLocker as well. And so, most of the Microsoft Office suites are whitelisted for us because we use those in the GCC High environment. Everything about CMMC is control. So many organizations do not want their users with the capability to install because, let's be honest, our users are our biggest risk next to Rob. But so what they'll do is they'll lock that down to an admin has to install it. But more importantly, there's a request process that goes into place here, because the last thing you want is a user to being able to load anything, any type of software up to the system, because now they're going to spend money on licensing for a solution they probably don't need or may already be in existence within the library that you already have. So part of that request is a research from the team to go through that library and see if any existing solutions you have in place already can provide the same type of service of this software they're requesting. More importantly, you're controlling who is approving that software and then who is uploading that software for the user. So again, it's all about control. Anybody else, if you want to jump on that?
All right. Next question from Kurt. If the BOM is worked as CUI and I extract the MPNs and identify COTS parts from the list, are those parts considered protected because they came from the protected BOM?
So it depends on if it's true COTS or not. Understand that for something to be true COTS, there's a very specific criteria it has to fall under, because COTS falls under US code. And if it meets that criteria, and I'm going to summarize it for Rob, can I go down to Walmart or can I go online and purchase it in its exact same form, its exact same specifications, and its exact same packaging? Then it's COTS. But if the answer to any of those questions is no, it's not COTS at that point, and then it's going to be in play. Now, as far as if it's CUI or not, you're not going to like the answer, but it's what Damien was talking about earlier. You've got to ask the KO or the PMO, because they are the owners of that data as representatives of the department. They're the ones that have got to tell you definitively whether it should be considered CUI or not. Now, like I've mentioned in other Connect webinars, there is that federal CUI rule on the horizon. And if in its final version, that standard form requirement stays in there. So call your congressman, call your favorite lobbyist, tell them to make sure that that stays in there. It's going to identify not only the types of CUI, but also what is to be considered CUI underneath that contract. Last that I've heard was that they were targeting having that out sometime towards the end of the year. Now, whether that's still going to be the case or not, I don't know. But it's something that's desperately needed, and a lot of folks have been watching it since it came out as a proposed rule last fall.
Thanks, Thomas. I think we have time for one more question from Mark. We have an engineering PLM admin who wants to be an administrator of our PLM system, which contains CUI. They don't have any IT training. Can the PLM admin be trained, or is this not compliant? Anybody answer that from our team?
Yeah, if you want to jump on it, Thomas, or somebody else, I'm addressing Caleb's question because I know we're coming there.
I was
yeah.
trying to be quiet. I mean, God. So an engineering PLM admin who wants to be an administrator of the PLM system, which contains CUI, they don't have any IT training. So can they be the admin? Absolutely. Are you going to have problems when you go through awareness and training? Absolutely. Because one of the requirements on there is that the folks that have that administrative access, that privileged access, that security functionality access, that they are properly trained on those tools. So can they be on there? Absolutely. But you've got to train them. It's not a requirement to have paid training. It can be free training, but you've got to have training. That's regardless of if they're new or if they've been in that role for 20 years. You have to show the evidence for it.
Damien, anything to add to that before we wrap up?
I just want to also throw out there, and they require, the training required to have access to the CUI system as well.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for your questions. That is all the time we have to answer live today, but we will follow up with those who we did not get to your question. We'll be sending an email with the answer for you to make sure we get that answered. We wanted to let you all know that we just launched our 3rd annual CMMC survey. Shout out to Lauren for all her hard work on this again this year. If you're on this session, you are exactly the type of person that we want to hear from. We're taking a survey about your CMMC experience and opinions. It only takes 5 minutes to complete. And for every completed submission, we'll donate $10 to the Gary Sinise Foundation. And that foundation, if you're not familiar, supports veterans, first responders, and their families. And this is a cause very near and dear to us at Redspin. So the link to the survey is in our resources. And I think Lauren is going to add it to the chat if it's not already there as well. So you can click on that, and we would love to hear your feedback on your CMMC opinions and experience. All right, lastly, we just wanted to let you know about a couple of upcoming events. On June 9th, Dr. Graham will be speaking at the AFCEA TechNet International Conference in Brussels. His session will be on From Compliance to Combat Readiness, Cybersecurity as a Force Multiplier in the Modern Battleship. So looking forward to that conversation, Dr. Thomas Graham. And the next 2 events are actually webinars. So on June 11th, Mr. Teague will be speaking on an AMIA style webinar with Red Sentry and Secure Frame. And the link to register for that is in our resources tab under upcoming events on your Zoom bar. And lastly, a heads up, Redspin is going to host a CMMC webinar with Zscaler on July 16th. So if you're currently using Zscaler, or if you're not, you've got some great insights coming to you. So please save the date, and registration will be shared soon for that one. All right, our time has come to an end for today here at Redspin. We are here to help move federal contractors to a more secure, compliant, and resilient state to help protect the DIB. So thank you for joining us today. We'll see you next month on June 25th for our next CMMC Connect session. Thanks everybody for joining. Take care. Bye now.